introducing Maths Pathway, where every student has an individual program. The current Year 7 program has been developed with the idea of each student requiring an individual scheme of work. Hence we have had a pre-test. The pre-test diagnoses what needs to be learned in a particular section of the syllabus. Students only cover those parts that we've identified in the pre-test, and then there's a post-test. It was always intended that this will become part of a larger program encompassing all year groups from 5 upwards, and that the control exerted in Year 7 would be removed so that students will be able to progress at their own pace in different strands and across year levels. The rationale for this is straightforward. The years assigned to particular mathematics by the Australian curriculum is purely notional. Students' abilities vary widely, especially in mathematics, and they mature at different rates. At a small school like Carmel, any mathematics lesson taught in a traditional way is only ever going to be appropriate for a small proportion of students. So, if we look at a typical traditional class with the teacher at the front and students sitting in rows, what actually is the case is that we get some students for whom the lesson is perfect. They're absolutely ready to learn what's being taught and can access the lesson well. Then we have another group of students who already know the content. They may well be ahead, capable of learning more, and actually may well be quite bored by the lesson that's going on because of that. And then we have a group of students who are not ready for this lesson because there's gaps that they need to be filled before they could access the lesson. It's quite likely that these students will also be bored because they can't access the content. Certainly from a personal experience I can say that during my schooling I had experience of being in all 3 of these groups in different maths lessons. The continuum is a big idea of Maths Pathway. The idea is that if we view mathematics like this, as being from the time you start learning it to Year 10, and of course beyond Year 10, then students in a class are actually at different points on the continuum. To underline what I've just said, here's a quote from Professor John Hattie. Professor Hattie is a world-renowned educational expert, and for example it's his work that's led us to the sort of constant feedback that we now do throughout the school when we give feedback after every test and that sort of stuff. He says a better interpretation of the 5 in Year 5 is that there's likely to be 5 years spread of performance in that year. By the time we get to Year 10, that's likely to be a 10-year spread. Certainly this has been my experience of teaching mathematics for the last 20 odd years. But something that I did find surprising was this statistic. Only 12% of students are actually at the correct year level or above in Year 7. That means in a Year 7 class, only 12% of the students are actually in a position to learn all of Year 7 maths. Now it gets even more complicated because obviously mathematics just doesn't work in one line like this. There's different aspects to it, and even within these major headings we could break that down more, and Maths Pathway does actually do that for us. But if we look at a single student and we look at number and algebra, measurement and geometry, statistics and probability, we might find that that student is actually somewhere around Year 5 level in one of those strands, possibly at Year 8 in another one, and maybe Year 7 in another one. Now Maths Pathway will cope with this. It will give a student this level of work in number and algebra, this level of work in measurement and geometry, and this level of work in statistics and probability. So always giving them work that is appropriate to them. So as we just mentioned, Maths Pathway copes with all of this. Sophisticated diagnostics ascertain exactly where students are on the continuum in different topic areas, and that's done much more finely than just the broad headings that I mentioned on the last slide. Work is assigned on the basis that the student is ready for that work. Work is to be done in a structured and actually quite traditional way. So they're working on paper, writing solutions neatly, and everything labelled, headings, dates, and so on. Makes it a good revision document, makes it easy for teachers to help the student because they can see where they've gone wrong. Students' progress is measured in detail, but the main statistics produced are the following: effort, accuracy, and growth. So let's look at those in detail. Now I will say that I don't think effort is the right word for what they're calling effort, and I've actually mentioned that to Maths Pathway themselves. This number is based on the number of modules a student studies in one approximately 2-week cycle. The default setting is 6 modules, so 6 modules is 100% in terms of effort. More modules are greater than 100%. Less modules obviously less than 100%, but we can alter the number of modules set on an individual basis as needed. So some students may need to do more than 6, some may need to do less than 6. For example, a student's been seriously unwell for a week may only complete 3 modules in a 2-week period. However, this figure has to be treated with caution, as I alluded to at the beginning. A student may rush modules in order to try to inflate this figure, so they may do 8, 9, 10 modules, but they may not be doing them thoroughly enough and actually really learning the material, in which case it's really not effort. Some modules are obviously harder, and students' pace may therefore vary in different cycles, especially as students move towards Year 10 material. In this case, their effort may still be good, even though they're doing less than, say, 6 modules. Accuracy is a more important figure. It's fairly simple. If a student completes 6 modules and passes 3 of them when we do the test, then the accuracy is 50%. This figure needs to be used in conjunction with effort. An effort of 200% and an accuracy of 20% is clearly not what we want to achieve. It would be ideal if students passed everything, but to get a growth rate of 100%, and we'll come to growth in a moment, they need to pass 3 of 6. Growth. This is the most important. This is the absolutely crucial statistic. 100% is a growth of 1 year in terms of knowledge in 1 school year. So in some ways that's ideal. In the course of Year 7, if you learn 1 year's worth of work, when you come into Year 8, you're ready to do Year 8. However, one has to bear in mind what I said earlier about the fact that only 12% of students are actually ready for Year 7 work in Year 7. However, over all of the schools currently using Maths Pathway, the average growth is 160%. Now, the immediate thought of most people when they see this statistic is that it's driven by a few bright students who go ahead and do several years' work in a year. But that's actually not the case. A student could start at a lower level than their year. Certainly that's likely in at least some of the strands. But with a high growth rate, they can not only close the gap because they fill in the gaps in their knowledge from further back, but then continue to advance their studies. And this is certainly what's been seen by Maths Pathway in all the schools they work with at the moment. So what comes next? Maths Pathway tells us that several able students have completed all of the Year 10 work during Year 8. So what would they do? We're looking at a variety of possible options, including Cambridge International Examinations, who offer many different possibilities and courses and exams and so on. There's the Stanford Online High School, which is a very interesting prospect. And there are other online providers who do all sorts of courses in calculus and all sorts of things that those students could do. Our aim would be to deepen a student's knowledge at this point rather than just accelerate, but that doesn't mean no acceleration. All of these will set students up very well for all Year 11 and 12 options. At the other extreme, what about students who do not complete all of Year 10 by the end of Year 10? Perusal of the WASTE courses Applications, which is an 8R course, and Essentials, reveals that none of the prerequisite mathematics for these courses is Year 10. Very little of the actual content of these courses is covered in Year 10. Students who really understand, say, Year 8 mathematics and have had a good experience of learning mathematics because the work has been appropriate to them and they don't have gaps, will be in a better position to attempt these courses than those who have been dragged to the end of Year 10 with lots of gaps and often a bad experience of mathematics lessons. And as a final note, although obviously as teachers we get to know students very well at Carmel and we have a really good idea of the sorts of things they can do in Year 11 and Year 12, the Maths Pathway system also aids us in identifying future courses for all students. So we can use that information in conjunction with what we know about the students ourselves.